Sometimes the biggest dreams start with the smallest acts of kindness. For 12-year-old Marcus Johnson, it began with a flat tire on a quiet London street. He could have walked past the stranded silver Mercedes that Saturday afternoon. Could have kept his head down, continued on his way home from his uncle's auto repair shop. After all, what business did a boy from East London have helping someone in this fancy neighborhood? But Marcus wasn't the type to walk past someone who needed help. Not when he had the knowledge to make a difference. Not when he'd spent every Saturday for the past 3 years learning everything he could about cars, dreaming of someday working in Formula One. He had no way of knowing that the man standing beside that Mercedes was 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton. No way of knowing that a damaged lug nut would become the key to his future. No way of knowing that stopping to help would set in motion events that would transform his life forever. Marcus Johnson's fingers left smudges on his bedroom window as he watched the sunrise paint the East London sky. Even at 6 a.m., his heart raced with excitement. Saturday meant one thing: Uncle Tony's auto repair shop. He turned to his wall of Formula Satin, one posters, his eyes landing on his favorite, Lewis Hamilton raising the championship trophy. "One day," Marcus whispered, reaching out to touch the glossy paper. At 12 years old, he already knew exactly what he wanted to be: a Formula One engineer. The floor creaked outside his room. Mom was up early, as usual. "Marcus, you're all ready. Awake." She peeked in, still in her nurse's scrubs from the night shift. Dark circles ringed her eyes, but her smile was warm as sunshine. "My car-crazy boy." "Morning, Mom." Marcus grabbed his backpack. "Want me to make you some tea before you sleep?" She shook her head, pulling him into a tight hug. "Such a good boy. But I'm fine. You get going to Uncle Tony's. Just be careful on your walk, okay?" Marcus nodded, breathing in the familiar scent of hospital antiseptic mixed with her lavender lotion. Ever since Dad passed away 3 years ago, Mom worked double shifts to keep them going. She never complained, but Marcus noticed how her hands shook sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking. In the kitchen, he grabbed a banana and stuffed 2 granola bars in his pocket. The refrigerator held a collection of his school papers, all A's in math and science. His physics teacher said he had a gift for understanding how things worked. Marcus hoped she was right. Outside, the morning air felt crisp against his dark skin. He adjusted his red Mercedes F1 cap, a birthday gift from Mom that must have cost her a week's groceries. The streets were quiet, with only a few early birds heading to work. The walk to Uncle Tony's shop took 30 minutes, but Marcus had his route down to 25. He knew every shortcut through the neighborhood, every loose brick in the walls. He had to hop over every friendly cat that waited for a morning pat. His mind wandered as he walked, imagining the roar of F1 engines. He could picture himself in the Mercedes garage, making split-second decisions that could win or lose a race. The other kids at school dreamed of being drivers, but Marcus knew the real magic happened in the engineering bay. Uncle Tony's Auto Repair came into view, its faded blue sign creaking in the morning breeze. The shop wasn't much to look at, with its cracked concrete and oil-stained parking lot, but to Marcus, it was better than any playground. "There's my favorite grease monkey!" Uncle Tony's voice boomed across the lot. He wasn't really Marcus's uncle, just Mom's best friend from high school, but he'd been family since before Marcus could remember. "Got 3 oil changes and a transmission rebuild today. Ready to get your hands dirty?" Marcus grinned, already heading for his work coveralls. They were too big, rolled up at the ankles and wrists, but Uncle Tony said he'd grow into them. "What about the Bentley from yesterday? Did you figure out what was wrong with the timing belt?" Look who remembers. Uncle Tony's laugh echoed off the garage walls. "Come see for yourself." And while you're at it, tell me what you've learned about fuel injection systems this week." As Marcus followed him into the garage, the familiar smell of motor oil and rubber wrapped around him like a blanket. This was his favorite place in the world, where parts and problems made sense, where he could take things apart and put them back together again, where everything had a solution if you just knew where to look. They worked through the morning, Uncle Tony explaining every step, asking questions, nodding with approval at Marcus's answers. He never treated Marcus like a kid, expected him to learn, to think, to solve problems on his own. "You've got the touch," Uncle Tony said, watching Marcus carefully clean a set of spark plugs. "Some people, they just know machines, like they can hear what's wrong, feel it in their bones. Your dad was like that." Marcus's hands slowed. Dad had been a mechanic too, before the accident. Sometimes when Marcus worked on engines, he imagined his father's hands guiding his own, showing him the right way to hold tools, how to listen to the engine's story. "Think he'd be proud?" Marcus asked quietly, not looking up from his work. Uncle Tony's hand landed warm and heavy on his shoulder. Proud? Boy, he'd be over the moon. His son, dreaming of Formula One? Working harder than grown men twice his age? He'd be telling everyone who'd listen. The morning flew by, and before Marcus knew it, the clock read 2 p.m. "Better head home," Uncle Tony said. "Your mom will be up soon, and I know she worries when you're out too late." Marcus cleaned his tools carefully. Uncle Tony's first rule, respect your equipment, and hung up his coveralls. His hands were stained with grease, but he didn't mind. These were working hands, learning hands. "Same time next Saturday?" Uncle Tony called as Marcus headed for the door. "Try and stop me." Marcus grinned, pushing his cap back on his head. The walk home felt different than the morning journey. His mind was full of everything he'd learned. The way Uncle Tony had shown him how to diagnose engine problems by sound, the tricky repair on the Bentley's timing belt, the perfect satisfaction of hearing an engine purr after they'd fixed it. As he cut through the quiet streets of the expensive neighborhood, his favorite shortcut home, Marcus imagined his future. Maybe someday he'd be the one keeping Lewis Hamilton's car in perfect condition, making sure every part worked just right. Maybe someday. A flash of silver caught his eye, and Marcus stopped mid-step. Up ahead, hazard lights blinked on an expensive car pulled over to the side of the road. Even from a distance, he could tell it was a Mercedes. His heart skipped a beat as he saw a familiar figure standing beside it, looking down at a flat tire. No way, Marcus thought. No way in the world. But sometimes the impossible happens on just another Saturday. Marcus blinked hard, sure his eyes were playing tricks on him, but when he opened them again, the scene remained the same. A sleek silver. Mercedes pulled over on the quiet street, and beside it, Marcus's heart nearly stopped, was Lewis Hamilton himself. The 7-time Formula One world champion was studying a flat tire with the same focused expression Marcus had seen 1,000 times on TV. He wore simple black jeans and a white t-shirt, looking so normal that it seemed impossible. Marcus's feet wouldn't move. His brain kept spinning like an engine that wouldn't catch. Should he walk past and pretend he hadn't seen anything? Should he offer to help? What if Hamilton thought he was just some nosy kid? Then he remembered Uncle Tony's voice. Knowledge is useless if you're too scared to use it. Taking a deep breath, Marcus walked forward. His hands were trembling, and he stuffed them in his pockets to stop them from shaking. 20 steps away. 15. 10. Hamilton looked up, and Marcus almost turned and ran. But there was something. Tired in the champion's eyes, something human that made Marcus find his voice. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said, his words barely a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Do you need help with that tire?" Hamilton's expression shifted from cautious to curious. "You know about cars, young man?" Marcus nodded, his cap slipping forward. He pushed it back, and Hamilton's eyes caught the Mercedes logo. A small smile touched his lips. "I help out at my uncle's auto repair shop," Marcus explained, his voice stronger now. "I noticed you've got a flat and, well, I've changed lots of tires." Hamilton studied him for a moment, then gestured to the car. "Be my guest. I was just about to call my team, but—" He glanced at his watch. "They're all at the factory today, preparing for next week's race." Marcus approached the car, his heart pounding, but his mind clearing as he focused on the task. He circled the vehicle, examining the flat tire. "The sidewall's damaged," he observed. "Must have hit something sharp. Good thing you pulled over quickly. Driving on it could have damaged the rim." Hamilton's eyebrows rose. "That's exactly what happened. Hit some debris back there." He pointed down the road. "You've got a good eye." "My uncle says you have to look at the whole problem before you start fixing anything," Marcus said, then bit his lip. Was he talking too much? But Hamilton nodded. "Your uncle sounds wise. The spare's in the trunk. I was just about to get it out." Marcus helped Hamilton open the trunk and locate the spare tire and jack. His hands had stopped shaking now that he was focused on the work. This was just like any other tire change at Uncle Tony's shop, except it wasn't. Not at all. As Marcus positioned the jack carefully under the car, Hamilton asked, "What's your name?" "Marcus Johnson, sir." "No need for sir, Marcus. Lewis is fine." Hamilton watched as Marcus worked the jack with practiced movements. "How long have you been interested in cars?" Marcus carefully raised the car. "As long as I can remember. My dad was a mechanic before." He trailed off, focusing on loosening the lug nuts in the correct pattern, just as Uncle Tony had taught him. "Before what?" Hamilton's voice was gentle. "Before he passed away," Marcus said quietly, keeping his eyes on his work. 3 years ago. But he's the one who got me interested in Formula One. We used to watch all your races together." There was a moment of silence, filled only by the sound of metal on metal as Marcus worked. Then Hamilton said softly, "I lost my grandmother right before my first championship. She was one of my biggest supporters. Sometimes I still race for her." Marcus looked up, meeting Hamilton's eyes for the first time. There was understanding there, and something else, a recognition that made Marcus stand a little straighter. They worked together to remove the flat tire, Marcus explaining, each step as he went, just like he did with Uncle Tony's customers. Hamilton listened intently, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested. Everything went smoothly until they reached the last lug nut on the spare tire. It wouldn't tighten properly, spinning in place no matter how Marcus turned it. "That's strange," Marcus muttered, examining the problem. "The threads might be—" He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small flashlight, shining it on the lug nut. "Ah, there's some damage to the threads. But I think—" He dug deeper in his bag, past his granola bar and water bottle, until he found what he was looking for. A small thread chaser tool Uncle Tony had given him. "This should fix it." Hamilton watched as Marcus carefully cleaned and repaired the damaged threads. "That's impressive problem-solving, Marcus. Most people would have given up or called for help." Marcus shrugged, but pride warmed his chest. "Uncle Tony says there's always a solution. You just have to think it through." With the threads repaired, the lug nut tightened perfectly. Marcus double-checked all the others, then lowered the car back to the ground. The whole job had taken less than 20 minutes. "Perfect," Hamilton said, examining the newly mounted spare tire. Absolutely perfect. He seemed to be thinking hard about something, his eyes distant like they got just before a race. Marcus gathered his tools, trying to fight the disappointment that it was over. This would make an amazing story to tell at school on Monday, even if nobody believed him. "Marcus," Hamilton said suddenly, "do you have a phone number where I can reach you?" Marcus's heart skipped again. "Yes, sir. Yes, Lewis." He recited his mom's mobile number, which Hamilton typed into his phone. "You've got real talent, Marcus, not just with the technical work, but with problem-solving. That's rare." Hamilton paused, that thoughtful look still in his eyes. "Would it be all right if someone from my team contacted you?" Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "Thank you for your help today," Hamilton said, holding out his hand. Marcus shook it, trying to memorize every detail of this moment. As he watched the silver Mercedes drive away. The damaged lug nut sat heavy in his pocket. Hamilton had told him to keep it. Marcus had no idea that this small piece of metal would become one of his most treasured possessions, or that this chance encounter on a quiet Saturday afternoon was about to change everything. He turned toward home, his mind spinning with possibilities. In 2 weeks, he would understand exactly what Hamilton had been thinking about during those thoughtful pauses. But for now, Marcus walked through the gathering dusk, holding tight to a lug nut, and a dream that suddenly felt a lot more possible than it had that morning. Marcus burst through the front door of his apartment, startling his mom, who was making dinner in their tiny kitchen. The smell of her famous jerk chicken filled the air. But for once, food was the last thing on his mind. "Mom! Mom! You're never going to believe what happened." The words tumbled out of him like parts from a broken gearbox. He pulled the lug nut from his pocket, holding it out like a precious jewel. "Slow down, baby," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "What's got you so excited?" Marcus took a deep breath and told her everything. The silver Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton, the flat tire, the conversation. With each detail, his mother's eyes grew wider. "Lewis Hamilton?" she repeated, sinking into a kitchen chair. "The Lewis Hamilton! Marcus, are you sure? He's going to have someone call us." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her where he'd saved the number he'd given Hamilton. "He said I had real talent, Mom. He said that." His mother reached out and touched his cheek, her eyes glistening. "Of course you do, baby. Just like your father." She glanced at the photo of Dad on their wall, the one where he was standing proudly in front of his old repair shop. He would have loved this story. That night, Marcus could barely sleep. He kept replaying every moment in his head, every word Hamilton had said. He placed the lug nut on his bedside table, right next to his dad's old wrench. The next morning, he raced to Uncle Tony's shop, arriving even earlier than usual. His uncle was just unlocking the doors when Marcus came running up. "Uncle Tony! Uncle Tony!" Marcus skidded to a stop, out of breath. "Yesterday, after I left, something amazing happened." He told the story again, this time including all the technical details he'd left out when telling his mom the sidewall damage, the thread repair, the precise pattern he'd used to tighten the lug nuts. Uncle Tony listened with growing amazement. When Marcus finished, his uncle sat heavily on a nearby toolbox. "Well, knock me over with a feather," he whispered. "My boy helped Lewis Hamilton." He looked at Marcus with pride shining in his eyes. "Tell me you remembered everything I taught you about proper tire mounting?" "Everything," Marcus assured him. "I even used that thread chaser you gave me when the spare's lug nut wasn't catching right." Uncle Tony threw back his head and laughed. "That's my boy, always prepared." His expression grew serious. "You know, Marcus, meeting Lewis Hamilton, That's luck. But being ready for that moment? Having the knowledge and tools to help? That's not luck at all. That's preparation, meeting opportunity. The next 2 weeks seemed to stretch on forever. Marcus jumped every time his mom's phone rang. He checked it constantly for missed calls or messages. Each day that passed without word from Hamilton's team made his heart sink a little lower. Maybe they forgot, he said to his mom one evening, pushing his dinner around his plate. Or maybe I wasn't as helpful as I thought. Patience, baby, his mom said, though he could tell she was anxious too. Important people are busy people, and even if nothing comes of it, you still helped Lewis Hamilton. That's a story you'll tell your own kids someday. At school, Marcus told only his best friend James about what had happened. James, whose bedroom was also covered in F1 posters, listened with wide eyes. But what if they do call? James asked. During lunch? What if they offer you a job or something? Marcus shook his head. I'm 12, James. Nobody's giving me a job. But they could, set something up for when you're older, right? Like a scholarship or an internship or something? Marcus had thought about that. Had thought about nothing else, really. But he didn't want to get his hopes up. Maybe, was all he said. The days ticked by. Marcus threw himself into his work at Uncle Tony's shop with even more enthusiasm than before. He read everything he could find about F1 engineering, staying up late with his tablet, learning about aerodynamics and fuel systems and tire compounds. Uncle Tony noticed his renewed dedication. You're working like you're trying to impress someone, he said one Saturday, watching Marcus meticulously clean a set of tools. I just want to be ready, Marcus replied. You know, in case. Uncle Tony nodded. That's the right attitude. Success is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and you never know when that opportunity might come. 13 days after meeting Hamilton, Marcus was helping his mom with the dishes when her phone rang. An unknown number. Marcus's heart leaped into his throat. His mom answered, drying her hands quickly. Hello? Marcus watched her face, trying to read her expression. Her eyes widened. Yes, this is Sarah Johnson, Marcus's mother. Yes, he's right here. She covered the mouthpiece with her hand and whispered to Marcus, It's someone from Mercedes Formula One. Marcus's hands started shaking so badly he had to put down the plate he was holding. His mom put the phone on speaker. Hello, Marcus, came a crisp British accent. This is James Vowles, Strategy Director for Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team. Lewis Hamilton told me about your impressive work with his tire the other week. Thank you, sir, Marcus managed to say. Lewis was particularly impressed with your problem-solving abilities and your knowledge of car mechanics. He mentioned you're interested in Formula One engineering? Yes, sir. Very interested. Well, Marcus, we have something we'd like to discuss with you and your mother. Would you be available to come to the British Grand Prix at Silverstone next month? As our special guests? Marcus grabbed his mom's arm to steady himself. She was already nodding vigorously. Yes, they both said at once. Excellent. We'll have someone email all the details to your mother. And Marcus? Yes, sir? Lewis mentioned you kept that troublesome lug nut? Marcus glanced at his bedside table where the lug nut still sat. Yes, sir, I did. Good. Hold on to it. Sometimes the smallest things can lead to the biggest changes. After the call ended, Marcus and his mom just stared at each other for a long moment. Then they both started talking at once, laughing and hugging and crying. A little too. Later that night, Marcus sat on his bed, holding the lug nut in his hand. In the dim light, it looked ordinary, just a piece of metal with slightly damaged threads that he'd managed to repair. But As he turned it over and over, he realized Uncle Tony had been right. Success wasn't just about luck. He'd been lucky to meet Lewis Hamilton that day, but he'd been prepared for that luck because of all the Saturdays spent learning at Uncle Tony's shop, because of all the nights studying F1 technology, because of his dad's influence and his mom's support and his own determination to learn everything he could about cars. Marcus didn't know it yet, but in just a few weeks at Silverstone, he would discover exactly why James Vowles had told him to keep that lug nut. He would learn why Hamilton had been so thoughtful that day, and how one small moment of helping someone in need could grow into something bigger than he'd ever dreamed. But for now, he carefully placed the lug nut back on his bedside table, right next to his dad's wrench, and fell asleep with a smile on his face, dreaming of silver cars and checkered flags and a future that was starting to feel real. The next morning, Marcus's mom's email pinged with a message from Mercedes F1. As she read it aloud at breakfast, Marcus's cereal got soggy, forgotten in his bowl. 2 VIP passes for the entire race weekend, she read, her voice filled with amazement. Hotel accommodations, transportation. Wait, Marcus, they're sending a car to pick us up. Marcus could hardly believe it. Can we call Uncle Tony? He needs to know. His mom was already dialing. They put the phone on speaker just as Uncle Tony answered with his usual cheerful, "Tony's Auto Repair." "Tony!" Marcus's mom exclaimed. "You're not going to believe this. Mercedes called." As they shared the news, Uncle Tony's booming laugh filled their kitchen. "I knew it. Didn't I tell you, Marcus? Preparation meets opportunity." "Tony," Marcus's mom said, her voice getting serious, "we need your help. Marcus has 3 weeks until the Grand Prix, and he needs to be ready. Really ready." "Say no more," Uncle Tony replied. "Marcus, you're going to get a crash course in F1, engineering that would make your father proud." The next 3 weeks were the busiest of Marcus's life. Every day after school, he went straight to Uncle Tony's shop. They stayed open late into the evening, with Uncle Tony teaching him everything he could about racing cars. F1 cars are different from regular cars, Uncle Tony explained, spreading diagrams across his workbench. The engines rev higher, the IVD aerodynamics are more complex, and every tiny part matters. Marcus absorbed it all like a sponge. He learned about downforce and drag, about tire compounds and temperature windows, about fuel mixture ratios and brake balance. Uncle Tony quizzed him constantly, making sure he understood everything. "What happens to tire grip when track temperature increases?" Uncle Tony would ask randomly while they worked on regular cars. "The rubber gets softer," Marcus would answer. "But if it gets too hot, the tires can blister and lose grip." His mom helped too, printing out technical articles for him to read at breakfast. She even ordered him a new outfit for the big day. Clean black jeans and a crisp white button-down shirt. "You need to look professional," she said, helping him try it on. "Like the engineer you're going to be someday." At school, James couldn't stop talking about it. "You have to tell me everything," he insisted. "Take pictures of the garage and the cars, and especially the engines." "If they let me," Marcus promised. The email had included a lot of rules about photographs and confidentiality. The night before the big day, Marcus couldn't sleep. He paced his room, checking and rechecking the backpack he'd packed for the trip. Inside was a small notebook for taking notes, his dad's old racing magazine that he always carried for luck, and of course, the lug nut from Hamilton's car. His mom knocked softly on his door. "Can't sleep?" Marcus shook his head. "What if I say something stupid? What if I don't? Know enough? What if—" She pulled him into a hug. Baby, you know more about racing cars than most grown-ups. Just be yourself. That's who Lewis Hamilton was impressed with, remember? The next morning dawned bright and clear. Marcus was up before his alarm, dressed and ready an hour early. When the sleek black Mercedes pulled up outside their building, he thought his heart would burst. The driver, wearing a crisp Mercedes team uniform, opened the door for them. "Mr. Johnson and Ms. Johnson," he said with a smile, "welcome to the Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team family." The drive to Silverstone took 2 hours, but to Marcus, it felt like minutes. He watched the British countryside roll by, imagining his dad sitting beside him, sharing his excitement. The lug nut sat heavy in his pocket, a reminder that this was all real. As they approached the circuit, Marcus pressed his face against the window. In the distance, he could see the grandstands rising up like mountains. The air seemed to vibrate with the sound of engines. Their driver turned off the main road, heading for a special entrance marked "Team Personnel Only." A security guard checked their passes, then waved them through with a smile. "This is the paddock area," the driver explained as they pulled up to a modern glass building with the Mercedes star shining on its front. "This is where all the teams set up their temporary headquarters during race weekend." Marcus stepped out of the car on shaky legs. The paddock was alive with activity. Engineers in team uniforms hurrying about, the smell of high-octane fuel in the air, the distant scream of an engine being tested. A familiar figure was waiting by the entrance. "Marcus!" Lewis Hamilton called out, walking over to greet them. He was dressed in his racing suit, ready for the first practice session. "I'm so glad you could make it." Marcus's mom seemed speechless, but she managed to shake Hamilton's offered hand. "Thank you so much for this opportunity, Mr. Hamilton." "Lewis, please," he smiled. "And thank you for letting us borrow your son for the weekend. We've got quite a program planned for him." He looked at Marcus. "Still got that lug nut?" Marcus pulled it from his pocket, feeling its familiar weight. Hamilton's smile widened. "Perfect. You're going to need that later. But first, how would you like to see where we keep the real magic? Our engineering room." As they followed Hamilton into the building, Marcus felt like he was walking into one of his dreams. But this was better than any dream, because this was real. And somehow, he knew this was just the beginning. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing a world of computers, screens showing car telemetry, and engineers bent over data readouts. Marcus stepped forward, ready to enter the world he'd always dreamed about. The lug nut clutched tightly in his hand like a key unlocking his future. The engineering room hummed with energy. Screens covered every wall, displaying colorful graphs, car diagrams, and numbers that changed faster than Marcus could read them. The air felt electric with possibility. "This is where we make the real decisions," Hamilton explained, leading them through the room. Engineers looked up from their work, offering friendly nods. "Every piece of data from the car comes here. Tire temperatures, fuel consumption, aerodynamic performance, everything." Marcus tried to take it all in. One screen showed a 3D model of their race car rotating slowly, different parts lighting up as data streamed in. Another displayed weather radar for the track. A third showed lap times broken down sector by sector. "Marcus!" A tall man with salt and pepper hair strode toward them. "I'm James Vowles. We spoke on the phone. Welcome to Mission Control." "Thank you for having us, sir," Marcus managed to say, shaking his hand. His mom echoed the thanks, looking just as overwhelmed as Marcus felt. "Lewis tells me you're interested in engineering," Vowles said. "How much do you know about Formula One car systems?" Marcus glanced at Hamilton, who gave him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Marcus remembered everything Uncle Tony had taught him. "Well, sir, F1 cars are different from regular cars in almost every way," he began. "They use hybrid power units with both internal combustion engines and electric motors. The aerodynamics create downforce to help the cars corner faster, and the tires are specially designed for different track conditions." As Marcus spoke, more engineers gathered around, listening. He explained about brake balance, tire compounds, and fuel mixture ratios. When he mentioned how tire temperature affects grip, one of the engineers shot Vowles an impressed look. "And how did you learn all this?" Vowles asked, when Marcus finally ran out of breath. "My Uncle Tony. He owns an auto repair shop. He's been teaching me extra stuff about racing cars ever since." Marcus patted his pocket, where the lug nut sat. "Ever since I met Lewis." Hamilton stepped forward. "Show them what you did with the lug nut, Marcus." Marcus pulled out the damaged lug nut and explained how he'd spotted the thread problem and fixed it. The engineers passed it around, examining his repair work. "Most adults wouldn't have spotted that," one engineer said, "let alone known how to fix it." "That's exactly what I thought," Hamilton agreed. He turned to Vowles. "Should we show him the car?" Marcus's heart skipped a beat. The car? The actual Formula One car? They walked through another set of doors into a large garage area. There it stood, sleek, silver, and more beautiful than any car Marcus had ever seen. The Mercedes W13, Hamilton's race car for the season. "Want to look under the hood?" Hamilton asked with a grin. For the next hour, the engineers showed Marcus every part of the car they were allowed to reveal. Some things, they explained, had to remain secret for competition reasons. They quizzed him about different systems, nodding approvingly at his answers. "Your uncle taught you well," one engineer said, as Marcus correctly explained how the drag reduction system worked. "He'll love hearing that," Marcus replied. "He stays up late studying this stuff, just so he can teach me." His mom, who had been watching proudly from the side, wiped her eyes at this. Hamilton noticed. "Your son has a real gift, Ms. Johnson," he said quietly, "not just for understanding the technical side, but for seeing how things work together. That's rare." "Just like his father," she whispered. The morning flew by in a blur of technical discussions and amazing revelations. Marcus learned about the computers that monitored every aspect of the car's performance, the complex strategies they used for pit stops, and the endless calculations that went into making race day decisions. Just before lunch, another man entered the garage. Tall and imposing, with silver hair and an air of authority, he walked straight to their group. "Ah, this must be Marcus," he said with a warm smile. "I'm Toto Wolff, team principal of Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team." Marcus's jaw dropped. Toto Wolff was legendary in F1, the man who had led Mercedes to multiple championships. "Sir," Marcus squeaked, shaking his offered hand. "I've been hearing good things about you," Wolff said. "Very good things indeed." He looked at the engineers. "How did our young friend do with the technical quiz?" "Scored higher than some of our interns," one engineer replied, making everyone laugh. Wolff's eyebrows rose. "Really? Well then." He glanced at Hamilton, who nodded slightly. "Marcus, would you and your mother join Lewis and me in my office? There's something we'd like to discuss." As they walked to Wolff's office, Marcus's mind raced. What could the team principal of Mercedes F1 want to discuss with him? His mom squeezed his shoulder, seemingly reading his thoughts. Wolff's office was smaller than Marcus expected, but it had a stunning view of the racetrack. Through the window, they could see cars from other teams practicing, their engines screaming as they flew past. "Please, sit," Wolff gestured to comfortable chairs. "Lewis, would you like to start?" Hamilton leaned forward in his chair. Marcus, when you helped me with that flat tire, you showed something special. Not just knowledge, but problem-solving, ability, initiative, the kind of thinking we look for in our engineers. Marcus sat very still, hardly daring to breathe. But more than that, Hamilton continued, you reminded me of myself at your age. I had a dream, and people who believed in me. People who gave me a chance when I was young. Wolf picked up where Hamilton left off. We've been discussing starting a new program, something to identify and support young talent, particularly from backgrounds that might not traditionally have access to Formula One careers. Marcus's heart began to pound. His mom reached over and took his hand. What would you think, Hamilton asked, about being the first participant in the Mercedes Future Engineers program? The room seemed to spin. Marcus gripped his mom's hand tighter. The program would include specialized training, Wolf explained. Summer internships when you're older, mentorship from our engineering team, and most importantly, a full scholarship. For your future engineering education, Marcus looked at his mom. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling wider than he'd ever seen. We'd need your mother's permission, of course, Hamilton added, and you'd still need to keep your grades up. But we want to invest in your future, Marcus. We want to help you become the engineer we believe you can be. Before Marcus could respond, Wolf held up his hand. One more thing. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out something that made Marcus gasp. It was a smooth metal chain, and hanging from it was a familiar shape, a lug nut, but not the damaged one in Marcus's pocket. This one was pristine, polished to a mirror, shine, with the Mercedes star engraved on one end. We thought you might like a matching set, Hamilton said softly. The one that needed fixing, and one that represents where that fix might lead you. Marcus reached out with trembling fingers to touch the shining lug nut. In that moment, looking at the two pieces of metal, one damaged but repaired, one pristine and full of promise, he felt the full weight of how his life had changed. He didn't know then that in 20 years he would wear both lug nuts to every race, one reminder of where he started and one of where he was going. He didn't know that he would one day stand in this same office, but on the other side of the desk, helping to choose the next generation of young engineers. But he did know, with absolute certainty, what his answer would be. As Marcus opened his mouth to speak, his voice full of dreams about to come true, Hamilton and Wolf exchanged knowing smiles. They had seen something special in a young boy helping with a flat tire, and they were about to help that something special grow into something extraordinary. Yes, Marcus said, his voice stronger than he expected. Yes, please. I want to be part of the program. His mom squeezed his hand. We'd be honored, she added, wiping happy tears from her eyes. But are you sure about Marcus? He's so young. Age is just a number, Hamilton said, smiling. I was 13 when McLaren signed me to their young driver program. Sometimes you just know when you found the right person at the right time. Wolf nodded. We've already spoken to several schools with strong engineering programs. They're excited about partnering with us on this initiative. He pulled out a folder. This contains all the details: the educational support, the mentorship program, the internship structure. Take it home. Review it carefully. Marcus couldn't stop staring at the two lug nuts, the old and the new, the past and the future. Hamilton noticed his gaze. Keep them both close, he said softly. One to remind you where you started. One to show you where you're going. The rest of the day passed in a blur of excitement. They watched practice sessions from the Mercedes garage, where engineers explained every decision and strategy call. Marcus absorbed it all, asking questions that made the team members exchange impressed looks. During lunch in the team cafeteria, his mom called Uncle Tony on video chat to share the news. Uncle Tony's booming laugh of joy echoed so loudly that several engineers turned to smile. "What did I tell you?" Uncle Tony exclaimed. "Preparation meets opportunity." Oh, your father would be so proud, Marcus. So proud. As the day drew to a close, Hamilton pulled Marcus aside while his mom spoke with the team's educational coordinator. "There's one more thing," Hamilton said. "Something I want you to remember on the hard days. Because there will be hard days." Marcus nodded, listening intently. "Success isn't just about talent or luck," Hamilton continued. "It's about believing in yourself even when things get tough. There will be people who doubt you, who say you don't belong here. But you do belong. That lug nut proves it." "Because I fixed it?" Marcus asked. Hamilton smiled. "Because you weren't afraid to try. Because you saw a problem, and instead of walking past, you stepped up to help. That's what real engineers do." 20 years later, Marcus Johnson stood in his office at the Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team headquarters, adjusting his tie as he prepared for an important meeting. The wall behind his desk displayed his engineering degrees, his patents for racing innovations, and photos of race victories where his strategic decisions had made the difference. Around his neck, hanging from a steel chain, were two lug nuts, one scarred but strong, one shining with possibility. He touched them briefly, a habit he'd developed over the years, drawing strength from their familiar weight. A knock at his door drew his attention. "Come in," his assistant poked her head in. "They're ready for you in the conference room, Mr. Johnson. The new candidate is here." Marcus smiled, picking up a folder from his desk. Inside was an application for the Mercedes Future Engineers program. Now, in its 20th year, with graduates working in F1 teams around the world. The program that had changed his life had gone on to change hundreds of others. Walking to the conference room, he passed the wall of team photos. There he was at 16, working his first summer internship, learning about wind tunnel testing. At 18, heading off to university with a Mercedes scholarship. At 22, joining the team full-time as a junior engineer. At 28, being promoted to lead engineer. And now, at 32, as the team's head of engineering strategy. He entered the conference room to find a nervous-looking young girl sitting with her mother. The girl wore a Mercedes F1 cap, just like he had all those years ago. Her hands were stained with motor oil. She'd mentioned in her application that she helped at her family's garage. "Hello," Marcus said warmly, touching the lug nuts under his tie. "I hear you're interested in engineering." The girl nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. I love figuring out how things work, especially racing cars." "Well," Marcus smiled, sitting down across from her. "Let me tell you a story about a flat tire, a damaged lug nut, and how sometimes the smallest things can lead to the biggest changes." As he began to speak, he saw the same spark in her eyes that Hamilton and Wolff had seen in his 2 decades ago. The same hunger to learn, to grow, to be part of this amazing world of speed and innovation. Marcus had told this story hundreds of times over the years, to students, to reporters, to new team members. But he never tired of it, because it wasn't just his story anymore. It was the story of every kid who ever looked at something broken and thought, "I can fix that." Every young person who dreamed of being part of something bigger than themselves. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out something that made the girl's eyes widen. A smooth metal chain with a polished lug nut hanging from it. The Mercedes star gleaming on its surface. "Sometimes," he said, holding it out to her, All it takes is one moment of courage to change your entire future. One decision to stop and help. One chance meeting that opens a door you never even knew existed. The girl reached out with trembling fingers to take the chain, just as he had done 20 years ago in Toto Wolff's office. Her mother wiped tears from her eyes, just as his had done. And somewhere, Marcus knew, Lewis Hamilton was smiling, remembering a young boy who had helped him with a flat tire on a quiet Saturday afternoon. A boy who had become the engineer he'd dreamed of being, and who was now passing that dream forward to the next generation. Marcus touched his own lug nuts one more time and began the interview, ready to help another young dreamer find their way into the extraordinary world of Formula One. Because sometimes the smallest things, a flat tire, a damaged lug nut, a moment of kindness, can lead to the most amazing futures. And that's the real magic of racing. It's not just about the cars or the speed or the technology. It's about the people who see possibility where others see problems, who have the courage to reach for their dreams, and who remember to hold out a helping hand to those coming up behind them. That's what Marcus had learned on that life-changing Saturday, and what he now taught others. Success isn't just about getting where you want to go. It's about helping others find their way there too. Thanks for joining me for this inspiring story about Marcus, Lewis Hamilton, and how a simple act of kindness can change lives. I'd love to know. Where are you listening from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. The support helps me create more stories like this one. Want to hear another amazing story about dreams coming true? Click the video appearing on your screen right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Until next time, keep believing in your dreams, and remember, sometimes the smallest actions can lead to the biggest changes.